You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 20th of January 2014. Labour promises extra £120 for workers who lose long-term jobs. BBC's office notice board sparks fresh row over Labour bias. German doctor who killed British patient with drugs overdose sues dead man's sons because they made him miss dinner. Alternative policing in some minority communities. Disappointment urges thousands of Greeks to migrate. Swiss scrap migrant benefits. Haribo pulls racist licorice after complaints. Obama, some folks don't like me because I'm black. Palestinian Authority residents complain over foreign workers. Saudi religious cops tell women not to use swings. Thought for the day, immigrants, the EU and the floods. And finally, 3 holy men and a bear. UK news. Labour promises extra £120 for workers who lose long-term jobs. People who lose their jobs could be paid an extra £20 a week in benefits for 6 weeks under a Labour government if they had been set in work for 4 or 5 years. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, said today that she was determined to reinforce and renew the contributory principle in the benefits system. Her plan could increase the £71.70 a week adult rate of job seekers' allowance to more than £90 a week to cushion the impact of people becoming unemployed. Ms Reeves said if this can be done in a cost-neutral way by extending the period people need to be working and paying national insurance to qualify for contributory JSA, it would be a very valuable step forward. BBC's office notice board sparks fresh row over Labour bias. Conservative MP Rob Wilson writes to Lord Hall calling for an investigation into a string of unbalanced reports and a BBC staff notice board displaying anti-Tory newspaper clippings. The BBC is facing fresh allegations of bias in favour of the Labour Party after it emerged that journalists have pinned a series of anti-Tory tabloid newspaper headlines to the wall of its Westminster studios. On one notice board, a Stop the Cuts poster has been pasted up next to a headlines introducing a gun nut Tory MP, I tried to shoot a cat, and you are joking, Tory MP was not wearing trousers when stopped by police. World at 8, everyone knows the bias towards the far left of the BBC. German doctor who killed British patient with drugs overdose sues dead man's sons because they made him miss dinner. A disgraced doctor, Daniel Urbani, who killed a British man due to an appalling blunder over his painkillers, is suing the dead man's son in Germany because he missed a post-conference dinner. Rory Gray and his brother Stuart disrupted a speech Urbani was giving at a conference on plastic surgery in the German town of Lindau in 2010, calling him a charlatan and a killer. Urbani's ability to work in Germany was never questioned, despite the fact he was struck off by the GMC in Britain. He refused to attend the inquest into his victim and the medical hearings which barred him from ever working in Britain again. The German Doctors' Chamber, the equivalent of the General Medical Council in the UK, still wants Urbani struck off, but they are powerless to force him to go while he still retains the support of the local authority which licenses him. World at 8. Despite the fact this guy is a German citizen, he is as black as the ace of spades, with all the pompous and cruel attitudes of many of his kind. The Germans have overworked the pro-black angle since the last war and seem to be prepared to put up with this guy. It's a shame he is still walking the streets in whatever country, isn't it? Alternative policing in some minority communities. Tom Windsor, the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, said some communities never call police in cases as serious as murder, instead administering their own justice. Police are never called by certain minority communities because they administer their own justice even in cases as serious as murder, sexual assaults on children, the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, Tom Windsor, has said. He said offences including honour killings and violence, domestic abuse, sexual assaults on children and female genital mutilation were among those not reported to police because communities wanted to deal with them themselves. World at 8, you bet they do. Why do they bother to come to the UK if it were not for our laxness in monetary matters? They really want to live as they were living at home, don't they? They really should either not come here or go home. They must really understand that it is not home from home here and we do things differently. European news. Disappointment urges thousands of Greeks to migrate. The ongoing financial crisis and recession of the Greek economy, added to a record unemployment rate of 27.8% last October, is forcing thousands of Greek citizens to migrate to other European countries in search of job opportunities and better working conditions, as Daily TVMA reports. Tens of thousands of doctors and engineers are abandoning Greece, with the USA and European countries such as Germany and Great Britain being the most popular destinations. Middle Eastern countries have also seen an increase of migration from Greece. The Norway Post recently noted how migration from southern European countries increased dramatically in recent years, with immigration from Greece having increased by 49% in the year between November 2012 and 2013. Great Britain has also seen a 16% increase in migration from other EU members, which amounts to about 25,000 people. The British Labour and Pensions Department indicated that migration from Greece increased by 31% between September 2012 and 2013. World date, oh God, not more. Swiss scrap migrant benefits. Switzerland is scrapping benefits for unemployed migrants from the European Union and planning new powers to expel them ahead of a referendum on a migration cap next month. Residency permits for foreign pensioners who retire to Switzerland and apply for state benefits will also be reviewed. The aim is to relieve the pressure on the welfare budget. Under new rules announced last week, Britons and other EU citizens, as well as incomers from the European Economic Area, states of Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway, will no longer receive benefits if they lose their jobs and have not contributed to Switzerland's insurance fund for the jobless. Foreigners will lose their residency permit after 5 years if they've been out of work for the previous 12 months. World at 8, trust the Swiss. They won't give a jot about the plight of the migrants or the EU, and quite right too. If you can't look after your own country and people, you shouldn't be doing the job. Haribo pulls racist licorice after complaints. German sweet manufacturer Haribo will stop producing black-faced licorice sweets after Swedish customers protested on social media, complaining that the sweets play on racist stereotypes. The first criticism was raised in December, with members of the public complaining that some of the masks were based on racist caricatures of different ethnic groups. Haribo will continue to sell the Skipper mixed bags, but they will no longer contain the licorice pieces that caused offence in Sweden. World at 8. What bollocks! If someone is black, they're black. If white, then they're white. Why not celebrate diversity in sweets? As to the Swedes, they're amongst the highest suicide rates in the world, and now we know why. Can you still buy black jelly babies? If so, bite the heads off, you might feel a lot better. World news. Obama, some folks don't like me because I'm black. President Obama thinks some people don't like him because of his race. There's no doubt that there's some folks who just really dislike me because they don't like the idea of a black president, Obama told the New Yorker's David Remnick in the magazine's January the 27th issue. Now the flip side of it is there are some black folks and maybe some white folks who really like me and give me the benefit of the doubt precisely because I'm a black president, he added. The article noted that Obama lost white voters in 2012 by history's largest margin for a winning presidential candidate, and that his plunge in the polls last year, which many pundits declared were the worst year of his presidency, was steepest amongst whites. Some observers immediately mocked Obama for suggesting that race, and not his policies, is the reason for his dismal numbers. I'm fine with losing my job, losing insurance, being audited. I just can't stand that he's black. Orwell Force snarked on Twitter, cramming the weak economy, Obamacare and the IRS scrutiny of political non-profits into one tweet. World at 8. Yes, he's black. He's also half white, but he's still about as useful as tits on a boar hog. It has bloody all to do with his colour, doesn't it? No. In fact, even his ghastly wife doesn't appear to like him much nowadays either. Palestinian Authority residents complain over foreign workers. Workers in Israel and the Palestinian Authority now have something in common: complaints about foreign workers taking away what are supposed to be their good-paying jobs. According to a Bethlehem lawyer, workers in the city are up in arms over the arrival of a large contingent of Serbian construction workers who are building a project that they feel they should be working on. The project is being funded by Russia, and Bethlehem residents were told that it was to generate dozens of jobs for construction workers. Because of the inability or unwillingness of the new Palestinian Authority to prevent terror attacks against Israel, many PA construction workers who at one time worked in Israel have been unable to get jobs there, as Israel now prevents mass entry of PA workers out of fear that they will be recruited by terror groups to carry out attacks. As a result, most construction workers rely on PA government projects for jobs. Russia offered to build the project in Bethlehem, partly in order to provide jobs for workers. However, Russia decided instead to supply the workers itself and shipped in 350 workers from Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Saudi religious cops tell women not to use swings. Saudi Arabia's feared religious police entered a public part in the Gulf Kingdom and told women to stop using swings, an act that drew applause and criticism by viewers of a picture showing the men warning some women at the swings. The picture went viral on social networks in Saudi Arabia before it was published by newspapers, showing two men from the Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice warning women against using the swings. Saudi Arabia's influential religious police shut a restaurant in the conservative Gulf Kingdom for massive violations, including allowing gender mixing. World at 8. That seems odd. Women can't use swings in front of men, but can have their genitals mutilated for them. Work that one out. Thought for the day: immigrants, the EU and the floods. All the fuss and bother about the so-called new initiative to ponder whether immigrants who cannot speak English should get onto the benefit system is null and void. It'll never come to pass without a nationalist or nationalistic input at high level, and this will not come from either the Liberals or UKIP. It is also rather late, in fact 30 odd years too late, as many of our earlier intakes into this country, having made money, opened their businesses, given houses and land to their progeny, still have wives at home or other clans who still do not speak a coherent version of English at all, and in fact speak only their mother tongues within their own enclaves, and suffice to say, and have been on some sort of benefits all the time. This ruling, if it ever does come to fruition, affects not only new immigrants from Europe, but of course the old guard, whom the establishment are protecting in the form of the police, councils and educational facilities. And the media are to boot in misreporting or underreporting. Interpreters have long since been a bugbear of us in the British National Party because they cost local councils, hospitals et al. A sizable chunk of money, and most are called by local police to help foreign criminals escape being charged, or by social services to get even more money out of the British taxpayers. The cold hard fact of life is that migrants come here to earn, make or steal money, or to work for others of their clans or take our jobs. They do not come here to wear English clothes, adapt the Christian religion, work in English shops unless franchised to members of their tribes, or to integrate in any way, shape or form. So speaking to English is not going to rate highly on their lists. And the yells from the human rights brigades in Brussels and our own lovies will reach the heavens. Most, if not all, immigrants want to rebuild their own countries, religions and cultures in this country. You can see it. They adopt, they adapt and they destroy. They want their own businesses, their own shops, their own temples and their own methods of education imposed on us, not ours on them. But they also want paying for the privilege of doing so, and also we must be silent or we are racists. On a personal note, and not party policy I hasten to add, I believe this particular ruling should have been made when we opened our borders many years ago, along with several others. That of not giving an immigrant baby automatic British citizenship when born over here. Adopting the Chinese ruling of one baby per family for migrants. Strenuous health checks for all newcomers and their relatives brought in later. Specific parts of the UK in which to settle and those areas to be limited. A heavy cap on all immigrants from now on, and in some cases, despite the EU, a complete ban from certain countries. Ignore the Schengen ruling completely. Forbid halal killing and halal foods and cosmetics being performed or imported into the country. Ban all bushmeat and endangered animals from being imported to migrant communities. Education and further education to be paid for by the family, and if students from other countries, immediate return on completion of courses. These may seem draconian, but if these rules had been implemented 40 years ago, we of the so-called far right, and now those of the middle and left, would not have the problems that we have now, and in fact the migrant population, although small, would be able to be integrated and appreciated far more than is the case now, with massive overpopulation and none integration. Although on history and on TV we're told we are all immigrants, and somehow, somewhere, even classic plays and books have acquired Negroes, Asians and Arabs in the most unlikely of plays and places, this is simply not true. Many countries are overcrowded, but with their own tribe and tribes, not from thousands of miles away in the short space of the last 4 decades. Reading the papers and the missing kids, murder and disappearances, and how our streets have altered, the one main factor is immigration to this country. Sure, the media have portrayed slummy white families looking like deliverance on a very bad day, but the vast majority of newcomers are Asian, Arab or Roma, which covers our numbers from many Eastern European migrants. Rachel Johnson of the Daily Mail cried when she visited Lewisham, and Dee, whose money received as a widow with 4 daughters amounts to $786 per month. One of the heaviest outgoings is her girls' mobile phone top-ups, and although she feeds her girls on the same amount as Rachel's daily coffees, I would suggest she ain't doing as well as she could. I have, and many have lived on far less money than that, and even with children the magic word is no. There is no money for phones if you want food. Dee is an immigrant of course, and Johnson was blubbing all the way to the bank on that one. Call me cynical if you like. The Indian girl and her poor little dead boy bring to the fore we should not have the amount of people from different cultures that we have even in sodding Scotland. It has been well known that since partition in India, Scotland received huge amounts of Anglo-Indians and Indians fleeing the Troubles, and many Indians speak with a decided Scottish accent. The girl's mother is rich and her stepfather has, in the way of Indians, bought himself into the health and care industry with a 40-room care home facility. Lovely money, and her ma is worth a bit as well. Clearly this young lady has lost the plot. Married an African gangster family and God knows what else. Whatever the outcome, we would not have hundreds of idiots wanting to get on the news, searching for and later mourning for a child they didn't know and whose parents they didn't want to know if they hadn't come here in the first place. In short, if your aunt had balls, she'd be your uncle. Still, we cannot cry over what we haven't got the balls to change, so I read a very interesting piece on that other invention of hell, the European Union. Now one piece was very interesting. That so-called MEP Del Singh, who was having a freebie in Kabul and got killed, if ever there was such a fun holiday. What got me was the title, was set to be MEP. Now, as one of several probable MEPs myself in my region, there's no way anyone named as an MEP candidate for whatever party is automatically going to win a seat. Unless perhaps Asian and Labour. So that heading was a bit misleading, unless of course the Daily Mail possesses clairvoyant powers, of course. But the really good article was a double-page spread written by George Mobiot on the lack of trees and the rise of floods in the United Kingdom. It starts with farmers in Pontbrenne at the headwaters of the River Severn, Britain's longest river. In the 1990s they realised that the way of hill farming, putting more sheep on the hills and denuding the landscape of ditches, hedges and trees, was not working. So in short they planted shelters of trees, dug out ponds and used their own compost for bedding more trees. A government official noticed one day when walking over their fields in a rainstorm, the water flashing off the land suddenly disappeared when it reached the belt of trees the farmers had planted, and it appears that water sinks under the soil of trees at 67 times the rate it sinks under grass into soil. I can testify to that, as my back lawn looks like a green waterbed, whilst the soil under my newly planted trees is almost dry. Mobiot states one of the research papers estimated that even if only 5% of the Pontbrenne land had been reforested, if all the farmers in that catchment did the same thing, flooding peaks downstream would be reduced by 29%. For residents of Shrewsbury, Gloucester and other towns ravaged by the Severn floods, That means problems more or less solved. He's right, as other countries who have indulged in deforestation for either monetary or farming needs have found. It doesn't work if you're subject to rain, and of course most of those countries are, as having rain, otherwise we would not have the forests to cut down. He also reports that all the trees planting grants in Wales have been stopped. The offices responsible for them closed down, and if Welsh farmers want to do the same as the Pont Bryn ones, they will not only have to pay for the trees themselves, but also lose the money they would have got to farm those lands. And there is the nub of the problem, the unbreakable rule laid down by the EU's Common Agricultural Policy. If you want to receive your single farm payment, by far the biggest component of farm subsidies, the land has to be free from what it calls unwanted vegetation. Land covered by trees is not eligible. These subsidy rules have enforced mass clearances of vegetation from hills. Just as tree planting grants have stopped, the land clearing grants have risen. Even on land so poor that no animals can graze, farmers will be paid to put them there, but to first receive the money they will have to deforest that scrubland, hill or hedgeland. The EU is well known for its stupidity, ignorance or just plain malevolence as far as UK farmers and fishermen go, and this law is just one rule that we could and will have to go without if we don't want to be flooded out every year. But the ruling for our fishermen to throw back dead fish has also been ignored for years, so how does one tackle this particular form of social engineering from the European Union? Mobiot goes on to say, governments can now raise the special mountain payments whose purpose is to encourage farmers at the top of the watersheds from £208 per hectare to £371. This should be renamed the flooding subsidy. It pays for the wreckage of homes, the evacuation of entire settlements and the drowning of people and animals who don't get away in time. What he doesn't say is that it also pays for the loss of land, the loss of belongings, the wrath of the people flooded and the hefty amounts of money the insurance companies will earn. Put this ruling and other similar idiotic rulings allowed to dominate our country and its people with the massive immigration we are being forced to accommodate and all the rules around that from the EU, and you have a dictatorship in the form of a benevolent one, which it isn't. And this is despite all the MEPs from various parties in this institution who are not allowed to do their jobs for their country, even if only a few want to do it and not rock the financial gravy boat. Would-be UKIP voters note. Ergo, I am a tree hugger, and why are we still taking down trees at a rate of knots? Even round Borden I'm sure the Gippos make their money by tree felling, because every month an established tree somewhere around here is felled. Local residents' associations are just as much to blame, as most of their relations run these companies, and in the last 2 years they cut down 2 magnificent Scottish pines. They were around 100 footers, around which the new estate had been built. Both were on raised grass banks, not near pavings or houses or cars, and both were demolished within a year of the other. No disease, but gone. In fact, they were the only things that made that estate look decent and not a place for people with very little money or immigrants. Whilst denuding our landscapes and farms courtesy of the EU, we are also building new builds on floodplains. Just outside Farnham there was a space of fields and they're always flooded in wet weather. There were a couple of old cottages on the road, but now it boasts a huge new estate, no trees, and the waters are at the back of those houses. So whilst farmers are bribed to alter our centuries-old landscape, our greedy builders are doing the same. Paving over gardens or spaces, taking down trees and hedges and building brick walls all encourage rainwater and river water to go elsewhere. And where is that? Back up to the sky or the sea? No, it's forced to go into houses and towns previously untouched by floods, and of course the usual floodplains now being built on. In days of old, when buying a house, you were told all the best places have already been built on. High land is already occupied by castles, large houses or farms. Very low land was left for obvious reasons. Never buy down and never buy on a main road. And if you like a place at 4 o'clock in a winter's afternoon, you will love it in the summer. Point made. But for the EU to bully our farmers into making alterations which do not benefit our country or land is reprehensible in my eyes, as are the politicians who allow it to become law in the UK. Rather like the Human Rights Act, which kicks us in the teeth with monotonous regularity. But with trees, this is more long-term for nature or us to repair. Trees, once gone, forgotten, but we will pay the price if we do not take matters into our own hands and stop voting for people who will not change anything if it doesn't pay them to do so. And finally, 3 holy men and a bear. A Catholic priest, a Baptist preacher and a rabbi all served as chaplains to the students of Northern Michigan University at Marquette in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They would get together 2 or 3 times a week for coffee and to talk shop. One day someone made the comment that preaching to people isn't really all that hard. A real challenge would be to preach to a bear. One thing led to another and they decided to do an experiment. They would all go out into the woods, find a bear, preach to it and attempt to convert it to their religion. 7 days later they all came together to discuss their experiences. Father Flannery, who had his arm in a sling, was on crutches and had various bandages on his body and limbs, went first. Well, he said, I went into the woods to find me a bear, and when I found him I began to read to him from the catechism. Well, that bear wanted nothing to do with me and began to slap me around. So I quickly grabbed the holy water, sprinkled him, and Holy Mother Mary of God, he became as gentle as a lamb. The bishop is coming out next week to give him First Communion and confirmation. Reverend Billy Bob the Baptist spoke next. He was in a wheelchair, had one arm and both legs in casts, and was on an IV drip. In his best fire and brimstone oratory he exclaimed, "Well brothers, you know we Baptists don't sprinkle. I went out and I found me a bear, and then I began to read to my bear from God's holy word. But that bear wanted nothing to do with me. So I took hold of him and we began to wrestle. We wrestled down one hill, up another and down another, until we came to a creek. So I quickly dunked him and baptized his hairy soul. And just like you said, he became as gentle as a lamb. We spent the rest of the day praising Jesus. Hallelujah." The priest and reverend both looked down at the rabbi, who was lying in a hospital bed. He was in a body cast and traction with IVs and monitors running in and out of him. He was in a really bad shape. The rabbi raised his tattered and bandaged head and said, "Looking back on it, circumcision may not have been the best way to start." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the #1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 20th of January 2014. Labour promises extra £120 for workers who lose long-term jobs. BBC's office notice board sparks fresh row over Labour bias. German doctor who killed British patient with drugs overdose sues dead man's sons because they made him miss dinner. Alternative policing in some minority communities. Disappointment urges thousands of Greeks to migrate. Swiss scrap migrant benefits. Haribo pulls racist licorice after complaints. Obama, some folks don't like me because I'm black. Palestinian Authority residents complain over foreign workers. Saudi religious cops tell women not to use swings. Thought for the day, immigrants, the EU and the floods. And finally, 3 holy men and a bear. UK news. Labour promises extra £120 for workers who lose long-term jobs. People who lose their jobs could be paid an extra £20 a week in benefits for 6 weeks under a Labour government if they had been set in work for 4 or 5 years. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, said today that she was determined to reinforce and renew the contributory and a killer. Ubani's ability to work in Germany was never questioned, despite the fact he was struck off by the GMC in Britain. He refused to attend the inquest into his victim and the medical hearings which barred him from ever working in Britain again. The German Doctors' Chamber, the equivalent of the General Medical Council in the UK, still wants Ubani struck off, but they are powerless to force him to go while he still retains the support of the local authority which licenses him. World at 8. Despite the fact this guy is a German citizen, he is as black as the ace of spades, with all the pompous and cruel attitudes of many of his kind. The Germans have overworked the pro-black angle since the last war and seem to be prepared to put up with this guy. It's a shame he is still walking the streets in whatever country, isn't it? Alternative policing in some minority communities. Tom Windsor, the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, to the wall of its Westminster studios. On one notice board, a Stop the Cuts poster has been pasted up next to a headlines introducing a gun nut Tory MP, I tried to shoot a cat, and you are joking, Tory MP was not wearing trousers when stopped by police. World to date, everyone knows the bias towards the far left of the BBC. German doctor who killed British patient with drugs overdose sues dead man's sons because they made him miss dinner. A disgraced doctor, Daniel Farage, who killed a British man due to an appalling blunder over his painkillers, is suing the dead man's son in Germany because he missed a post-conference dinner. Rory Gray and his brother Stuart disrupted a speech Farage was giving at a conference on plastic surgery in the German town of Lindau in 2010, calling him a charlatan principal in the benefit system. Her plan could increase the £71.70 a week adult rate of job seekers' allowance to more than £90 a week to cushion the impact of people becoming unemployed. Ms Reeves said if this can be done in a cost-neutral way by extending the period people need to be working and paying national insurance to qualify for contributory JSA, it would be a very valuable step forward. BBC's office notice board sparks fresh row over Labour bias. Conservative MP Rob Wilson writes to Lord Hall calling for an investigation into a string of unbalanced reports and a BBC staff notice board displaying anti-Tory newspaper clippings. The BBC is facing fresh allegations of bias in favour of the Labour Party after it emerged that journalists had pinned a series of anti-Tory tabloid newspaper headlines